All right, good morning, ladies. So what we're going to do today, we're going to look at two other systems of production. We're going to look at slavery and indentureship, and we're going to argue or try to see how oppressive these systems were. Now, could someone recap for us the different systems that we would have looked at before, the other systems of production?
Sir, we looked at slash and burn, we looked at the encomienda system, and last week we looked at the plantation system.
Very good. Thank you very much, Gilbert. So today we're looking at slavery. Why is slavery separated from plantation when when slave labor was used on the plantation? Why is there separation?
Sir, could you repeat that?
Sorry, repeat the question.
Why, Roxanne? You weren't in the
No,
other class?
sir. I joined the wrong class first.
Oh, so you're in two class. Okay.
No,
I had the same issue, Roxanne.
All right. So Roxanne, what happened? You left the other class.
yes, sir. I left it after I realized that I'm in the wrong one.
Okay. So what is the difference between the all right, so why the syllabus separates slavery from plantation system as systems of production?
Sir, is it because like the plantation system kind of existed before where it was like the cultivation of crops, but then the plantation system kind of led to slavery?
You're correct. You're correct, but there's one part of the answer that is missing.
But sir,
Go ahead, Prince.
after slavery ended, when the slaves got their freedom, didn't like some of them stay on plantations to work and stuff?
Repeat that for me, please.
Sir, like after slavery ended, some like slaves stayed on plantations to work.
All right. Almost there. Anyone else?
Sir, is it because this enslaved people didn't just work on plantations, they worked on ships also?
Yes, that is the answer. So because very good, so not all enslaved people worked on a plantation. So some of them worked on ships, some worked in the forest to cut mahogany, to logwood. Some went for hunting. So they had enslaved people that did quite a lot of different stuff, right? So that's one of the reasons why they would have separated. So slavery now, one of the main things is that we know it was a system of production because one, it produced goods locally for the enslaved people or persons in the colony to eat. and also it produced goods for export. Its main purpose for slavery is that goods were exported. You have sugar that was exported, cotton, coffee, cocoa, logwood, mahogany, a lot of things were exported. And so we know for sure that enslaved labor was used for the production of goods. Now, how do we know that this system was oppressive? Is that the way in which Europeans controlled the Africans proved to us that it was a very oppressive system. So they control them legally, physically, psychologically, culturally. What do we mean by legal control? What involves legal control?
Sir, it would probably involve like a contract between the slave and their slave masters.
Contract, yes, correct. It's a form of contract, but what would you call that body of contract?
A law?
Law, you're correct. There's somebody, okay, in the way. The person that just entered the room with that name, DFH, you can rename yourself for me, please. I need it for the register. Because once you enter the room, it goes in on the register. All right, good. So we know for sure that legal control is linked to law, right? So they've made laws to control the enslaved people. Now, these are some quotes from Elsa Govey. I'm going to ask anyone to read these for me, please.
The West Indian slave laws, quotes from the West Indian slave laws of the 18th century by Elsa V. Govea. The West Indian slave laws of the 18th century, Govea. The West Indian slave laws of the 18th century mirror the society that created them. They reflect the political traditions of the Europeans, colonizers, and the political necessities of a way life based upon plantation slavery. The law legalized and justified enslavement. Slave law justified the system of slavery. The law is the original basis of slavery in the West Indian colonies. Though slave laws were essential for the continued existence of slavery as an institution, slavery is undoubtedly accepted as legal. The law defines the position of the enslaved and slavery. Enslaved Africans were deemed as subordinates to whites. In the French and Spanish slave laws, enslaved were deemed as subordinate persons. In the British slave law, they were deemed as property. As property, they were kicked and bought.
Thank you very, very much. So we know for sure that what Elsa Govey is arguing, she said that West Indian slave laws, the slave laws mirror the society. So if you look at the slave laws, it can tell you what the society was like, right?
Excuse me. Sorry, Sir Paris is in the waiting room.
Okay, thanks. Thank you very much. So we know for sure that the slave laws mirrored the society in which created them. So if you should look at a slave law, it would give you an idea of what the society was like. In addition, the slave laws provide a justification for slavery. So without slave laws, you could not have an enslaved person, or you would not know who is a slave from who is not a slave. So when we look at slave laws, it defines the position of the enslaved. In addition, slave laws stipulate what form of conduct would not be tolerated. So for example, enslaved persons were forbidden to carry weapons. They could not meet in large groups. They could not beat drums or blow horns. They were not permitted to leave the plantation without permission. So if you're leaving the plantation, you had to have a pass to leave, just like when you're leaving school. During school hours, you must have a pass to leave. If an enslaved person should strike a white person, they would be put to death. And so slave laws stipulate the punishments and the penalties that the enslaved people would have. Now, this historian, Alvin Thompson, said all aspects of a slave life, conduct, and the work came under official scrutiny. So for everything for the enslaved person came under scrutiny. It was written down in a body of books, that a legal document, so people know what is required of the enslaved and what is not. So we know for sure that when we look at the slave laws, the slave laws were very oppressive, very, very oppressive. For example, one of the slave law mentioned that Africans were property. They were not considered human beings. So that in itself was a form of oppression. It took away the human nature of enslaved Africans. Another way in which they tried to control them was physical control. Plantation did not have like boundary or, like fences, but the enslaved persons knew the boundaries. You knew that the next door to the plantation was somebody else's estate. It also showed that you must not leave these boundaries. And so there were physical control where it tried to control the movements of the enslaved people. So they could not meet together. They could not go anywhere just like that. They had to have a permission, a physical, a note or a pass to move about freely. Naval visits, the Navy from the European countries visit to ensure that the enslaved were controlled physically, that they weren't doing anything out of the norm. They had militia troops that were there to ensure, to control them physically. Ports and signal stations that were also there. So we know for sure that they would have controlled the enslaved people physically. Another form of control was psychological control. And psychology has to do, you deal with the mind. Control your mind. You have to be careful how people control your mind. Your mind is very important because people can control your mind in such a way that you think what is right when it is actually wrong, very wrong, and you believe that it is so right. So you have to protect your mind and have control over your mind, the psychological control to drive fear into the enslaved people, to make them happy slaves. One such example of psychological control is public execution. My question to you, how is public execution a form of psychological control? How is public execution a
Sir,
form of psychological control?
sir, it was like setting an example. So
It
if
was setting an example, yes?
someone were to disobey one of the rules, they would be executed in front of other slaves, so they knew the consequences of their actions.
Very good. Excellent. Thank you very much. So we know for sure one perfect example relayed to us by historian Pedro Welch. He said a male slave, Sharper, was found guilty of rape and murder of a white resident in Bridgetown, Barbados. The governor's secretary wrote, "Let the Negro be carried to the old churchyard in Bridgetown, there to be chained to the stake, to fix for that purpose. The old execution may be performed with such solemnity that it may strike spectator with the greatest awe and terror." So when they are doing public execution during the slave society, guess what? It's not, they don't hide and do it. It's a festive season. Notice was sent out to all the plantation. Bring all the enslaved people and you put them, line them up, surround the area, and everybody sit and watch. And so that is going to drive fear into the enslaved. So nobody will ever think again to ever rape somebody or murder somebody because of the fear that it is going to drive into the enslaved people. So we know for sure that they would have tried to control them psychologically. Another way in which they tried to control them psychologically, same way, was that Thomas Cecilwood in his diary mentioned that one was to be burned, the other two was to be hung upon alive in iron and left to perish in that dreadful situation. So if we look at how the burning of enslaved people when they did something wrong, and also putting the enslaved persons, actually hanging the enslaved person, it was a form of psychological control. Another way in which Thistlewood would have tried to control his enslaved psychologically was Derby was well whipped. So Derby, an enslaved person, well whipped, and he made Egypt defecate in his mouth. So what is happening here is that you're not going to misbehave on the plantation because one, while I can deal with the whipping, I don't want Egypt to defecate in my mouth. And then the next thing also is that not only Egypt defecating in Derby's mouth, that is horrible, the mere fact Derby, another enslaved person, have to be the one to be defecating in somebody's mouth, so that Egypt had no privacy. And so that was also another form of psychological control. Another one that is mentioned by this person here, Professor Orlando Pattison, he said that enslaved persons were controlled psychologically by how they would have used certain stereotypes, that they were lying, they were coward, they were lazy, they were buffoon, they were devoid of courage, devoid of manliness. That type of psychological control that still continues today. That people of African descent are Black people, that they are lazy and coward, right? That our hair is bad hair, our language is, African language is bad speaking, African religion is demonic. So this type of psychological control continues today, right? And it is this, in fact, I believe Marcus Garvey was the first person to say that emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our mind. And it was popularized by Bob Marley. In fact, that psychological enslavement and control still continues today because deep down in some people's mind, they believe that anything white is good and anything black is bad. I'm not saying that white is bad. That's not what I'm arguing. I'm not saying that white is black bad. I'm saying that everything that God created is good. So it cannot be that white is good and black is bad. So if God created black, then black is also good as white is good. Okay? So thank you very much for the message. So we know for sure, ladies, that they control them psychologically, the enslaved people psychologically. There was another point I want to make when it comes to the psychological control. I think I missed that point. All right, I'll get back to it. Cultural control. Cultural control, they try to control them culturally. So they taught them to reject their African culture, to embrace European language, to reject their African language, words. Even today, anything African is considered bad, especially the Creole part of the word. It is considered bad speaking. Your names, my name today is Hall. I'm sure my ancestors' name is not a British name. They removed the name from my ancestors. European culture and religion are considered to be superior to the African. Africans were not allowed to beat drums or blow horns. Perfect example, growing up in the Seventh-day Adventist church, I was told that we are not supposed to beat drum because drums were used by the Africans, and the Africans used the drums, which will bring demonic spirit. That's what I was told growing up in the SDA church. I know for sure, based on what I've seen or heard, that they have now embraced the use of drums. Thank God for the Pentecostal church, because it was the Pentecostal church that really embraced the use, the apostolic, the Pentecostal, that embraced the use of African drumming in their worship services. And so we know for sure that drums were banned. Even today, some churches don't use drum because it is considered to be something that is negative. But however, they still use the worship songs that have drum beat in that. All of the hill songs and all of these different stuff have drum in it. They listen to it, but you can't play drum in the church. Makes no sense. But we know it's a form of control that would have happened. Next form of control, reward. They try to give them reward as a form of control. So if you behave well, you're going to get, you give us good service, I'm the white person going to be very loyal to you. Another way, if a male behaved well or informed, tell the planter everything that was going on, all the little gossip on the plantation, then guess what? They would get the chance to go and visit their female on the next plantation where they have access to their female sexuality. They receive incentive. So we know for sure that reward was used as a form of control. So these are the different ways in which they would have controlled the enslaved people. Through reward, because once you give them reward, it's going to divide the plantation. So you're going to have good slave versus bad slave. And that is going to divide the African, which is a form of oppression, because you bring division between the Africans, it is very oppressive. It's a way in which you try to control them. Their culture, you control their culture. They could not relate to their culture. They were not allowed to beat drums and all of these. They were taught to reject who they were. That is very oppressive. To deny your culture and to deny the culture of your ancestors or allow people to practice the culture of their ancestors is very, very oppressive. Not to mention the psychological control that still remains today, that even some people think that Black is so bad. Even some girls would say, oh, my hair is bad. Why your hair is bad, but her hair prettier than my hair. Your hair pretty. You mix with things like that. All hair is good here. All hair is good here. Black hair, Chinese hair, Indian hair, white hair, all hair is good here.
That's right, sir.
Repeat. Somebody said something?
So I was agreeing with you.
Okay. Thanks much. So we know for sure that all here good here. So the psychological control, even this thing you're too black for, you're too pretty for a black girl. We need to get rid of these mental enslavement, those psychological control that still continues today. And so ladies, we know for sure that they would have controlled them psychologically. Physical control was very oppressive. Remember what the syllabus asks us to do? Look at the systems of production and show how oppressive they were. So if you go into the exam and they ask you to talk about the system of slavery, you can mention what the system of slavery, what they use slave labor for, and you can also talk about how oppressive the system actually was, because we know for sure that through the legal control, physical control, psychological control, cultural control, through reward, the system was very, very oppressive. Next, how did they respond to slavery? Could somebody read this quote for me, please?
Blacks pursued their freedom by all means possible. They declared war on the system and fought bloody battles in the process. But slave societies were able to persist partly because of the complex and pervasive structures of control and regulation.
Very good. Thank you very much. So we know for sure that blacks didn't sit down and said, all right, enslave us, do what you want to do. No, they didn't do that. Africans fought, and not all Africans agreed that slavery was to be abolished. Some said, listen, after we abolish slavery, who's going to feed us? Where are we going to live? Who's going to give us medical care? Who's going to give us clothing? Some said, no, I don't agree with this freedom, this concept some of you talking about freedom. It is better we stay with master, we stick to what we know. Stick to the plantation. You're talking about freedom. There's a lot of things that in life that we try to do, that people try to persuade us and tell us not to do. And in the end, they are the one going to benefit. You have ever been in a situation like that before? Where you try to do something or you see something that is not right, and somebody saying, don't talk out against it. Don't talk about it, because if you talk about it, you might get in problem. But when you talk about it, you listen, the person listens, and then there's some form of changes. So we know for sure that it is time. Look at, for example, if the lady in the US, what's her name again? Rosa Parks. If Rosa Parks, when the white man come onto the bus and said, lady, go to the back of the bus, and Rosa Parks said, all right, I'm sorry to sit in your seat. I'm so sorry. And go to the back of the bus. Maybe today in the United States, blacks wouldn't have some civil rights. But Rosa Parks said, listen, I'm not moving. I am not moving, so you will have to go to the back of the bus. That one woman changed the civil rights movement in the US. They could have just sit down and said that they are going to agree to oppression, but no, some persons actually fought against the system of slavery. So what were some of the response? One, they did day-to-day resistance. This is resistance that happened every day. So you damage the master's property, you steal food, you interrupt seasonal work routine, you sabotage the estate, you fail to complete a task. Resistance. You poison the food of the planter, you're resisting. You work slow. For example, when you give some activities in school, you give the students work to do and to finish within the time. They take so long to finish the work, so long to complete the task. It's a form of resistance. I'm tired. Maybe that's one of the reasons why they are resisting. But we know for sure that they would have, these are some of the ways in which they would have responded to slavery. Another way is through slave revolts. You had several different slave revolts, a lot. In fact, Richard Dunn said that there were over 70 slave revolts in the Caribbean. Yeah, the Taki Rebellion, the Berbice Rebellion, the Haitian Revolution, the Fedon Rebellion, the Bossa Rebellion, the Jamaica Slave Revolt in 1831. The enslaved people would have revolt, right? Resisted through revolution. Now, ladies, not only, most time when we talk about slave revolts, we think about slave revolts that only males are the one resisting slavery. That's not true. The females also resisted slavery. And a perfect paper, an article was done by Vereen Shepherd. She wrote an article called The Petticoat Rebellion. And she spoke about the different ways in which enslaved women would have been involved in the resistance to slavery. One was that enslaved people, women use their bodies by exposing their behind as a form of resistance. Raise their voices in liberation song. The work used to, I remember I used to teach a class with Ebby Nelson, what's her name again? Ebby, Melissa Boyne, and a few other girls. Those group, one of my first history group at Senang. And once I used to give a work, like, and they can't manage the work, they usually burst out in a song in the class. Raise their voices in liberation. And they don't know that it was one of the legacies of their ancestors. Another way in which people raise their voices is that somebody tell you to do something and in this you don't approve of it, you basically throw words at the person. You sing a song to mock the person or to throw words. Growing up, I used to have a neighbor. She would, once her back of her yard was behind, so both of our backyards were together. And so she never liked my mother, and she's always, I don't know if you have bad neighbors. So growing up, every time she would, once she see my mother in the back of the yard hanging out clothes, she just come around the back of her house doing something and she started to sing a song. And you know the song is a direct, like she's throwing words in the form of a song. It was the same thing that the enslaved woman would have done as a form of resistance, gynecological resistance. They refused to bear children. Infanticide, abortion was another way in which they would have tried to control or resist the system. They also used to harass and frustrate the female enslavers, the white women. They used to trouble the white women and said, listen, you're the white female and you're everything and whatever, you control everything, but guess what? I'm sleeping with your husband. They used to mock them. That was their form of resistance. They used to also resist sexual abuse. They didn't just say, all right, I'm going to take it, sexual abuse like that. They resisted. And most time, when we talk about female resistance, most students said infanticide, all of these different stuff, but most of them don't mention that females were very much involved in armed rebellion. Nanny Grigg of Barbados and Nanny of the Maroons, they were very much involved in armed rebellion. They used to take up guns and also fight. And they fought for their freedom. In fact, women used to exchange sexual favors for bullets and ammunition on the French forts in the French islands. In Newton Estate in Barbados, females withdrew their labor. They said, listen, we're not working. While slave revolts were taking place, women were the ones who transport the food, the guns, the ammunition. They were the ones who were nurses. They were the ones who prepared the meals. And so we know for sure that females would have resisted the system of slavery. So in response to slavery, we know also that psychologically some persons would have resisted. In fact, some say that Samuel Sharp, during the Christmas rebellion in Jamaica, said, I'd rather die on yonder gallows than live another day as a slave. That's making up his mind. It's a conscious decision he made in his mind that, listen, I'm not living another day as a slave, so kill me and done. Psychological resistance, cultural control. They also would have responded to cultural control because the mere fact that we have retention of African words today, Obi and Voodoo as religion, drums and African dance are still around. The mere fact that when you go to church on a Sunday or a Saturday and you hear drum in your church, it shows that the enslaved people would have resisted the system of, resisted to some extent the cultural control. And so from what we have seen here is that when we look at the different forms of control in slave society, we know for sure that enslaved people would have, we know for sure that the system of slavery was very oppressive, but we also know that they would have responded to the system. Next, indentureship. Indentureship was also in another system of production, and we know that it was also oppressive. How do we know that it was oppressive? The Indians and the Chinese also lived in slave huts. They had a lot of diseases because when you look at the slave huts, dirt floors, poor ventilation, lack of privacy. A lot of the water system was terrible. They had, just like us enslaved Africans had to have a pass to leave the plantation, the Indians and the Chinese had to have a pass to leave the plantation. Just like how the Africans endure sexual abuse, the same way the Indians and the Chinese would have endured sexual abuse by the whites. So we know for sure, as you think a historian would have argued, that the system was a new system of slavery. That was the title of his book. In fact, they were forced the Indians and the Chinese were forced to accept Christianity, and most of them were Muslim, Hindu, Buddhas, practice Buddhism, and they were forced to accept Christianity, European Christianity. And so we know for sure that the system of indentureship was very, very oppressive. You know, for example, the Hindus don't believe in eating cow. But one of the meal that the planters gave to them was salted beef. Some of them starved to death. The Muslims don't believe in eating pork, but they were given pork to eat. Salted pork, or all of these, the pigtail, the salted pigtail, all of these different stuff, they were given to them to eat. And so we know for sure that the system of indentureship was very oppressive. How did the Indians and the Chinese responded? They, just like the enslaved people, they rioted. They have the angel Gabriel rioting in Ghana in 1854. Some of them said, listen, I'm not living in this condition. I'm going to Asia. They gone back to Asia. They complained to their officials, and the system eventually came to an end. So ladies, we know for sure that indentureship was another form of system of production. We know that it was oppressive, indentureship, and we know that they would have responded. The same for slavery. All right. So tomorrow, we are not meeting tomorrow and Wednesday. So you're going to meet in your groups and you're going to produce your video on your various topics. And on Thursday, we are going, Thursday and Thursday, we are going to present it. Any question or comment in relation to the topic? Any question, any comments?
Sir, what year did indentureship end in Jamaica?
I deliberately did not put that on the slide because I want you to read.
Okay, sir.
Because it is going to be on the multiple choice. All right. Any other question or comments? So that's it. So ensure, ladies, take up your textbooks. If you don't have the textbook, I have both textbooks, soft copy. I can send both the textbooks to you and you should be reading. Ladies, enjoy the rest of the afternoon.
Same
Well,
to you,
the afternoon just started. Enjoy the rest of the day, ladies.
Sir?
Go ahead.
Sir.
Can you send the textbooks, please?
All right, will do.
Bless.
All right.
Thank you much, sir.
Yes, bye-bye.